There's a handful of stories in this post-Easter season that are some of my favorite. Jesus on the road to Emmaus, who takes the time to listen and learn from the two disciples he meets on the road before they recognize who he is. He hears about their grief over his crucifixion and their confusion over the resurrection stories they've heard. And the disciples, when they go fishing, going back to that which was familiar to them, as we often do in times of grief, seeking out what we know best to let our hearts heal and our minds rest. He lets them fish. He fixes them breakfast and they talk. And then he reminds them of what their ministry is, not fishing, but preaching and teaching and healing. Jesus meets his disciples where they're at, in moments when they can best understand him, and uses what they know to encourage their faith and call them to deeper ministry, to greater discipleship. Jesus did the same with people when he was alive. The rich young lawyer, Zacchaeus, the Samaritan at the well, the woman caught in adultery, the blind man to whom he asked, "Do you want to be healed?" Not every story about Jesus is like this, but there are enough of those that you get the sense that often Jesus took time to listen and learn about the people he met, the people who came to him or those to whom he reached out. He took time to listen and to learn about them. It's one thing to presume to know what someone needs or wants, what someone believes or what their politics might be, where they come from or where they hope to go in their life. It's another thing to assume. It's one thing to assume, it's another thing to listen and learn. And I say this not because I've got this mastered. Believe me, I don't. I'm as quick to jump to conclusions about people as anyone. But I'm reminded of this not by Jesus' regard and interest for others, but by what Paul does and says in today's reading. Paul's in Athens. Silas and Timothy have been left behind in Thessalonica. They're going to join him in Athens. Paul goes ahead. One of the places he visits is the Areopagus, which was a rocky, high hill in the city of Athens, a place. The Areopagus was also a group. They were the most prestigious council of elders in the city, those who debated philosophy and decided legal matters. Athens was an influential city. It's where Greek democracy was born. The Greek democracy which gave birth to our democracy. Hear the story from the 17th chapter of Acts. While Paul was waiting for Silas and Timothy, he was deeply distressed to see that the city of Athens was full of idols. So he argued in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and also in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Also some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers debated with him. Some said, "What does this babbler want to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign divinities." This was because he was telling the good news about Jesus and his resurrection. So they took him and brought him to the Areopagus and asked him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? It sounds rather strange to us, so we would like to know what it means." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners living there would spend their time in nothing but telling and hearing something new. Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and said, "Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way, for as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor, he made all the nations to inhabit the whole earth. And he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As even some of your own poets have said, for we too are his offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. While God has overheard or overlooked the times of human ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man who he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all, by raising him from the dead. When they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some scoffed, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." At that point, Paul left them, but some of them joined him and became believers, including Dionysius and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. Paul spent some time with the Athenians, listening to what mattered to them. He toured their city, learned what they cared about, what concerned them, what interested them. He came to know a bit about what they knew and what they needed. The Reverend Jason Cox, rector of St. Luke's Episcopal Church in San Francisco, writes, Paul tailors his message to connect with the Athenians, so in a way that they can hear the good news. He is preaching to a pagan audience with no relation to or history with the culture or scriptures that gave birth to Paul's own faith, neither as a Jew or as a follower of the way of Jesus. So he doesn't rely on his usual references of the law of Moses or the Old Testament prophets. Instead, Paul quotes a couple of Athenian poet philosophers. Paul compliments how religious the Athenians are with their many idols, noting how this indicates the natural desire with everyone to seek God, hoping to find meaning in the world. Paul is concerned, however, that all these idols will prevent the Athenians from making a connection to the living God he is telling them about.